Question 1. To address the challenge of improving operational efficiency within ENN Energy's gas distribution network maintenance, which of the following approaches best aligns with the UK's regulatory framework and best practices for energy companies? Option A. Relying on historical maintenance logs and operator experience alone to schedule future maintenance activities, bypassing any formal process for data analysis or regulatory reporting. Option B. Outsourcing all maintenance operations to the lowest bidder without a thorough due diligence process to verify their compliance with ENN Energy's safety and environmental standards. Option C. Reducing the frequency of routine inspections on less critical infrastructure to reallocate resources to more pressing issues without a formal risk assessment or regulatory approval. Option D. Implementing a new digital asset management system that integrates real-time data from field inspections, predictive maintenance algorithms, and automated work order generation, ensuring all data handling complies with GDPR and relevant energy sector security standards. The correct answer is D. Implementing a new digital asset management system that integrates real-time data from field inspections, predictive maintenance algorithms, and automated work order generation, ensuring all data handling complies with GDPR and relevant energy sector security standards. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because ENN Energy, as a regulated entity, must balance operational efficiency with strict adherence to the UK's regulatory framework governing energy supply and consumer protection. The challenge lies in identifying process improvements that enhance efficiency without compromising safety, reliability, or customer service, all of which are subject to oversight by bodies like Ofgem. Careful judgment is required to ensure any proposed changes align with ENN Energy's license obligations and the overarching goals of the energy market. Correct approach involves a comprehensive review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and proposing solutions that are demonstrably compliant with the Gas Act 1986, the Electricity Act 1989, and relevant Ofgem guidance. This approach prioritizes data-driven analysis and stakeholder consultation to ensure proposed changes are not only efficient, but also sustainable and legally sound. It aligns with the regulatory expectation that energy companies operate in a manner that protects consumers and promotes competition, as mandated by the Competition and Markets Authority, CMA, in its market investigations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on service levels or regulatory compliance would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to breaches of ENN Energy's license conditions, potentially resulting in fines or enforcement action from Ofgem. For instance, reducing staffing levels in customer service to cut costs without ensuring adequate response times would violate consumer protection regulations. Another incorrect approach would be to implement changes based on anecdotal evidence or without proper risk assessment. This disregards the need for robust evidence and due diligence, which are critical for regulated industries. Such an approach could inadvertently introduce safety risks or operational failures, contravening ENN Energy's duty of care and its obligations under health and safety legislation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the problem and its scope. Second, gather relevant data and analyze existing processes. Third, identify potential solutions, evaluating each against regulatory requirements, safety standards, and customer impact. Fourth, consult with relevant internal and external stakeholders, including regulatory affairs teams. And finally, implement and monitor the chosen solution, ensuring ongoing compliance and performance. Question 2. The review process indicates that certain stages within the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test's candidate onboarding procedure are experiencing delays. To address this, a proposal has been made to streamline the document verification step by reducing the number of cross-checks currently performed, arguing that this will significantly speed up the process. Option A. Implement the proposed streamlining of document verification, ensuring that the reduction in cross-checks is documented and justified by a projected time saving. Option B. Seek external consultants to review the document verification process and suggest general best practices for faster onboarding, without specific reference to the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test regulations. Option C. Conduct a thorough analysis of the current document verification process to identify specific points of delay, and then propose targeted adjustments that maintain full compliance with the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Tests, regulatory framework, and internal guidelines. Option D. Immediately implement the proposed streamlining of document verification to address the delays, as efficiency is the primary goal in candidate onboarding. The correct answer is A. Implement the proposed streamlining of document verification, ensuring that the reduction in cross-checks is documented and justified by a projected time saving. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficiency and process optimization with the absolute priority of adhering to the regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines specified for the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test. The core tension lies in identifying improvements without compromising compliance or introducing risks that could lead to regulatory breaches. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between genuine process enhancements and shortcuts that could violate established protocols. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies, and proposing solutions that are demonstrably compliant with the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test's regulatory framework. This approach prioritizes understanding the why behind current procedures and ensuring any changes are validated against the specific requirements of the assessment. It aligns with professional ethics by upholding the integrity of the hiring process and ensuring fairness and transparency, as mandated by regulatory guidelines. The focus is on improvement within the established boundaries, not on circumventing them. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering regulatory implications fails to acknowledge the absolute priority of compliance. This could lead to overlooking critical steps in the assessment process, potentially invalidating results or creating an unfair advantage for candidates, which would be a direct violation of assessment integrity principles. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing changes based on general industry best practices without specific validation against the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Tests framework is also professionally unacceptable. While general best practices can be a starting point, they must be adapted and confirmed to meet the unique regulatory and procedural requirements of this specific assessment. Failure to do so risks introducing non-compliant elements. A further incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction over process integrity, even if it appears efficient, is flawed. Regulatory compliance and the integrity of the hiring process are paramount and cannot be sacrificed for financial savings. This approach would likely lead to a disregard for essential procedural safeguards. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the specific regulatory landscape governing the assessment. For proposing any process optimization, one must ask, does this proposed change align with all specified regulations and guidelines for the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test? If there is any doubt, further investigation and consultation with compliance or legal experts within the scope of the assessment's jurisdiction are necessary. The principle of compliance first must guide all optimization efforts. Question 3. What factors determine the appropriateness of process optimization initiatives within ENN Energy, considering its regulatory obligations and commitment to operational efficiency? Option A. The perceived benefit to internal operational teams, without a formal assessment of how these changes align with broader regulatory requirements for consumer protection and fair market practices. Option B. The extent to which proposed optimizations align with ENN Energy's specific regulatory framework, ensuring no adverse impact on service quality or consumer charges, and facilitating transparent reporting. Option C. The potential for immediate cost savings, regardless of potential impacts on service reliability or adherence to pricing structures mandated by regulators. Option D. The speed at which new technologies can be integrated, prioritizing innovation over a comprehensive review of regulatory compliance and consumer impact. The correct answer is B. The extent to which proposed optimizations align with ENN Energy's specific regulatory framework, ensuring no adverse impact on service quality or consumer charges, and facilitating transparent reporting. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because ENN Energy, as a regulated utility, operates within a strict framework designed to ensure fair pricing, reliable service, and consumer protection. Process optimization, while beneficial for efficiency and cost reduction, must be implemented without compromising these core regulatory obligations. The challenge lies in balancing operational improvements with adherence to the specific regulatory requirements of the ENN energy operating jurisdiction, which likely includes detailed guidelines on cost recovery, service standards, and reporting. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization efforts do not lead to unfair charges for consumers or a decline in service quality, which could result in regulatory penalties and reputational damage. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding and integration of ENN Energy's specific regulatory obligations into the process optimization strategy. This means that any proposed changes must be evaluated against the backdrop of relevant legislation, industry codes, and regulatory guidance governing energy supply and distribution. The optimization should aim to achieve efficiencies that can be passed on to consumers through lower costs or improved service, in line with regulatory expectations for cost-reflective pricing and service delivery. This approach is correct because it prioritizes compliance and consumer welfare, which are paramount in a regulated industry. It ensures that ENN Energy's pursuit of operational excellence aligns with its license to operate and its duty to serve the public interest, as mandated by the regulatory framework. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on service quality would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory mandates that often stipulate minimum service standards and customer care requirements. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough regulatory impact assessment would also be flawed. This overlooks the potential for unintended consequences, such as non-compliance with reporting requirements or the introduction of practices that could be deemed unfair or discriminatory by regulators. Both these incorrect approaches risk violating the spirit and letter of the regulations, leading to potential sanctions, loss of public trust, and a negative impact on ENN Energy's long-term sustainability. Professionals at ENN Energy should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive review of the relevant regulatory framework. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and guidelines pertaining to process optimization and its potential impact on operations, pricing, and service delivery. Next, a risk assessment should be conducted to identify potential regulatory noncompliance issues associated with proposed optimizations. This should be followed by a stakeholder analysis, considering the interests of consumers, regulators, and the company. Finally, decisions should be made based on a clear understanding of how proposed changes align with regulatory objectives, prioritizing compliance, consumer benefit, and long-term operational integrity. Question 4. System analysis indicates that ENN Energy is exploring opportunities to streamline its operational workflows to enhance efficiency. When considering a proposed modification to a critical gas distribution process, what is the most appropriate method for evaluating its potential impact? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed modification against ENN Energy's internal operational guidelines and all relevant UK regulatory frameworks, including those pertaining to health, safety, and environmental standards, before any implementation. Option B. Prioritize the proposed modification based solely on its potential for immediate cost reduction, deferring any detailed regulatory compliance checks until after its successful integration. Option C. Implement the modification immediately to gauge its real-world impact on efficiency and address any compliance issues that arise subsequently. Option D. Rely on the judgment of the longest-serving operational managers to determine if the proposed modification aligns with ENN Energy's operational standards and regulatory obligations. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed modification against ENN Energy's internal operational guidelines and all relevant UK regulatory frameworks, including those pertaining to health, safety, and environmental standards, before any implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for ENN Energy employees involved in process optimization due to the inherent tension between achieving efficiency gains and ensuring compliance with stringent regulatory frameworks. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for process changes to inadvertently impact safety, environmental standards, or data integrity, all of which are heavily regulated. Professionals must balance the drive for improvement with an unwavering commitment to legal and ethical obligations. Correct approach involves a thorough, documented review of proposed process changes against all applicable ENN energy internal policies and relevant UK regulatory requirements, such as those overseen by the Health and Safety Executive, HSE, for operational safety, and the Environment Agency for environmental impact. This approach is best professional practice because it proactively identifies and mitigates risks before implementation. It ensures that any optimization efforts do not compromise ENN Energy's legal standing or its commitment to responsible operations, aligning with the principles of due diligence and corporate responsibility mandated by UK law and industry best practices. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings without a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment fails to uphold ENN Energy's duty of care. This could lead to violations of HSE regulations concerning process safety management or environmental permits issued by the Environment Agency, resulting in significant fines, operational shutdowns, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or the experience of a few senior staff, bypassing formal risk assessment and regulatory checks, is equally flawed. This bypasses the structured, evidence-based decision-making required by regulatory bodies and ENN Energy's own governance, increasing the likelihood of unforeseen negative consequences and non-compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the objectives of process optimization. This should be followed by a systematic identification of all relevant regulatory obligations and ENN energy policies. A risk assessment matrix should then be used to evaluate the potential impact of proposed changes on compliance and safety. Finally, all proposed changes must undergo a formal approval process that includes sign-off from relevant compliance and safety officers, ensuring that optimization efforts are both effective and legally sound. Question 5. The assessment process reveals that a newly developed scenario-based evaluation for process optimization roles at ENN Energy, while intended to be highly efficient, has generated some candidate feedback suggesting potential cultural bias in its framing. What is the most appropriate course of action for ENN Energy's hiring team? Option A. Immediately implement the new assessment as planned, given its intended efficiency gains, and address any concerns only if formal complaints arise. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the assessment's content, scoring, and implementation to identify and mitigate any potential biases, consulting relevant employment law and best practice guidelines for hiring assessments. Option C. Disregard the candidate feedback as subjective and proceed with the assessment, assuming the developers have already ensured its fairness. Option D. Temporarily halt the use of the new assessment and revert to the previous, less efficient method, without investigating the specific nature of the alleged bias. The correct answer is A. Immediately implement the new assessment as planned, given its intended efficiency gains, and address any concerns only if formal complaints arise. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficiency in the hiring process with the ethical and regulatory obligations to ensure fairness and prevent bias. ENN Energy, like any responsible employer, must adhere to employment law and best practices to avoid discriminatory hiring. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential biases within an assessment designed to evaluate process optimization skills, ensuring that the assessment itself doesn't inadvertently disadvantage certain groups of candidates. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both effective in identifying suitable candidates and compliant with all relevant regulations and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the assessment's design and implementation to identify and address any potential for bias. This includes examining the questions, scoring mechanisms, and the overall evaluation criteria to ensure they are objective, job-related, and do not disproportionately impact protected characteristics. This aligns with the principles of fair employment and the regulatory framework that prohibits discrimination. By proactively seeking to eliminate bias, ENN Energy upholds its commitment to diversity and inclusion and avoids legal repercussions. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the perceived efficiency of a new, untested assessment method without rigorous validation is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to unintentional discrimination if the new method is not demonstrably job-related and objective, potentially violating employment laws that mandate equal opportunity. Another incorrect approach, which involves ignoring candidate feedback regarding potential bias, is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for ethical considerations, potentially leading to a flawed hiring process and reputational damage for ENN Energy. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over fairness, by rushing the review of assessment materials, risks overlooking subtle biases that could have significant legal and ethical consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic and evidence-based approach to assessment design and review. This involves understanding the specific job requirements, designing assessments that directly measure those requirements, and rigorously validating the assessment for fairness and predictive validity. When concerns about bias arise, professionals must engage in a thorough investigation, consult relevant guidelines and legal requirements, and be prepared to revise or redesign the assessment to ensure compliance and ethical practice. Question 6. The control framework reveals that ENN Energy is undertaking a significant process optimization initiative aimed at improving operational efficiency. Which of the following approaches best balances the drive for efficiency with the imperative of regulatory compliance and risk management within the energy sector? Option A. Expediting the implementation of optimized processes by temporarily suspending certain non-critical control checks to meet aggressive project timelines. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive review of existing controls to identify how they can be enhanced or adapted to support the optimized processes, ensuring that all regulatory requirements remain met or exceeded throughout the transition. Option C. Prioritizing the implementation of new, streamlined processes that reduce operational steps, with a secondary review of control effectiveness after the optimization is complete. Option D. Focusing on achieving cost savings through process optimization, with the assumption that existing controls will automatically remain effective in the new operational environment. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing the implementation of new, streamlined processes that reduce operational steps, with a secondary review of control effectiveness after the optimization is complete. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the stringent regulatory compliance expected of a company like ENN Energy, particularly concerning process optimization. The pressure to demonstrate improvements can lead to shortcuts or overlooking critical control mechanisms. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization efforts do not compromise safety, environmental standards, or the integrity of reporting, all of which are heavily regulated within the energy sector. The correct approach involves a systematic review and enhancement of existing controls within ENN Energy's process optimization initiatives. This means identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies not just from a performance perspective, but also by assessing how current controls might be hindering or, conversely, how they can be strengthened to support optimized processes. This approach is right because it aligns with the principles of robust governance and regulatory adherence. Specifically, it ensures that ENN Energy's optimization efforts are undertaken within the established legal and ethical boundaries, preventing potential breaches of regulations related to operational safety, environmental impact, and financial reporting. It prioritizes a holistic view where efficiency gains are achieved without compromising compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a thorough impact assessment on existing controls would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the regulatory framework that mandates specific control measures to mitigate risks inherent in energy operations. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing new processes without validating their compliance with ENN Energy's internal policies and external regulations, represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This could lead to unintended consequences, such as non-compliance with environmental standards or safety protocols, exposing the company to penalties and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach, which bypasses established risk assessment procedures for the sake of speed, directly violates the principle of due diligence and regulatory oversight, creating a high likelihood of non-compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the full scope of regulatory requirements applicable to ENN Energy's operations. This involves a detailed review of internal control frameworks and external legal obligations. When considering process optimization, the framework should mandate a risk-based assessment of how proposed changes might affect compliance. This includes evaluating potential impacts on safety, environmental performance, data integrity, and financial reporting. Any proposed optimization must then be evaluated against these identified risks and regulatory mandates, ensuring that controls are either maintained, enhanced, or appropriately adapted to the new process, rather than being weakened or ignored. Question 7. The control framework reveals that ENN Energy's current hiring assessment process for technical roles is experiencing significant delays, impacting recruitment timelines. To address this, a proposal has been made to streamline the process by reducing the number of standardized technical tests administered and increasing the reliance on subjective interview feedback for final candidate selection. Considering the regulatory framework and guidelines applicable to ENN Energy's hiring assessments, which of the following approaches best balances efficiency with compliance? Option A. Introduce a new, proprietary assessment tool that claims to be faster and more comprehensive, without undergoing independent validation or ensuring its alignment with existing regulatory standards. Option B. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, starting with a pilot program to test revised assessment stages and scoring mechanisms, ensuring all changes are validated against established performance metrics and regulatory requirements before full rollout. Option C. Immediately reduce the number of standardized technical tests and increase the weight of subjective interview feedback to expedite the hiring process, assuming interviewers are experienced enough to make accurate judgments. Option D. Delegate the entire assessment process to an external recruitment agency with minimal oversight to offload the burden of process management and speed up hiring. The correct answer is B. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, starting with a pilot program to test revised assessment stages and scoring mechanisms, ensuring all changes are validated against established performance metrics and regulatory requirements before full rollout. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the stringent regulatory compliance mandated by the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Tests jurisdiction. The pressure to streamline processes for hiring can inadvertently lead to shortcuts that compromise the integrity of the assessment and potentially violate regulatory requirements designed to ensure fair and objective evaluation. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement process optimizations that enhance efficiency without sacrificing adherence to the established legal and ethical standards of the assessment. The correct approach involves a systematic review and refinement of existing hiring assessment processes, focusing on identifying bottlenecks and redundancies that do not impact the core assessment objectives or regulatory compliance. This approach prioritizes maintaining the validity and reliability of the assessment tools and methodologies, ensuring that any changes are validated against the assessment's stated goals and the specific regulatory framework. For ENN Energy, this means ensuring that any process optimization adheres strictly to the principles of fairness, objectivity, and non-discrimination, as outlined in the relevant UK regulations and SISI guidelines governing hiring assessments. This includes ensuring data privacy, secure handling of candidate information, and transparent assessment criteria, all of which are critical for regulatory compliance and maintaining the credibility of the hiring process. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed and cost reduction without considering the impact on assessment integrity would be professionally unacceptable. For instance, automating scoring without proper validation against human assessment or regulatory standards could introduce bias and violate the principle of objective evaluation. Another incorrect approach might involve reducing the number of assessment stages or interviewers to save time, which could lead to a superficial evaluation of candidate suitability and a failure to gather sufficient evidence to support hiring decisions, thereby contravening the due diligence expected under regulatory frameworks. Furthermore, any approach that compromises the confidentiality of candidate data or the transparency of the assessment process would directly violate data protection laws and ethical guidelines, leading to potential legal repercussions and reputational damage for ENN Energy. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape and the specific objectives of the hiring assessment. This involves a risk-based approach, where potential process changes are evaluated for their impact on compliance, fairness, and the overall effectiveness of the assessment. Stakeholder consultation, including legal and HR compliance teams, is crucial before implementing any significant process optimization. Continuous monitoring and evaluation of optimized processes are also essential to ensure ongoing adherence to regulatory standards and to identify any unintended negative consequences. Question 8. The control framework reveals that ENN Energy's current hiring assessment process for technical roles is experiencing significant delays, impacting the timely onboarding of qualified candidates. A proposal has been put forward to streamline the interview scheduling and feedback collection stages to improve efficiency. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for process optimization with the strict adherence to the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test regulatory framework? Option A. Focusing solely on reducing the number of interview stages to speed up the overall assessment timeline, without a detailed analysis of how this impacts the quality of candidate evaluation or regulatory compliance. Option B. Conducting a thorough review of the existing scheduling and feedback processes, identifying specific bottlenecks, and proposing targeted, data-driven improvements that are validated against the regulatory requirements for fairness and data integrity before implementation. Option C. Allowing interviewers to use their discretion in providing feedback, focusing on subjective impressions to expedite the decision-making process, and manually scheduling interviews based on immediate availability. Option D. Implementing a new automated scheduling system that prioritizes filling slots quickly, with a simplified, standardized feedback form for interviewers to reduce completion time. The correct answer is D. Implementing a new automated scheduling system that prioritizes filling slots quickly, with a simplified, standardized feedback form for interviewers to reduce completion time. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the stringent regulatory compliance mandated by the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test's jurisdiction. The pressure to streamline processes, especially in a hiring context, can lead to shortcuts that inadvertently compromise fairness, data integrity, or adherence to established procedures. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization efforts do not violate the spirit or letter of the regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a systematic review and enhancement of existing processes, ensuring that any changes are documented, validated, and aligned with the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test's specific regulatory requirements. This includes understanding the underlying principles of process optimization, such as Lean or Six Sigma methodologies, and applying them within the defined legal and ethical boundaries. Specifically, this approach prioritizes maintaining the integrity of the assessment process, ensuring fairness to all candidates, and safeguarding the data collected, all while seeking efficiency gains. This aligns with the overarching goal of regulatory compliance, which often emphasizes transparency, fairness, and accountability in hiring practices. An approach that focuses solely on speed without considering the impact on fairness or data accuracy is ethically flawed. It risks creating a biased selection process, which could lead to discrimination claims and reputational damage. This violates the principle of equal opportunity and the regulatory expectation of a robust and fair assessment. Another incorrect approach is to implement changes based on anecdotal evidence or personal preference, without a structured evaluation against the regulatory framework. This can lead to unintended consequences, such as introducing new vulnerabilities or inefficiencies that are not compliant. It bypasses the due diligence required to ensure that process changes are both effective and legally sound. Finally, an approach that ignores potential improvements due to fear of deviating from the status quo, even if the current process is inefficient, is also suboptimal. While caution is necessary, a complete lack of initiative to optimize within regulatory bounds can lead to prolonged inefficiencies that impact resource allocation and candidate experience, potentially hindering ENN Energy's ability to attract top talent. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory requirements. This should be followed by a systematic analysis of the current process to identify bottlenecks and areas for improvement. Any proposed changes must then be evaluated against the regulatory framework for compliance, fairness, and effectiveness. Pilot testing and stakeholder consultation are crucial steps before full implementation. Continuous monitoring and feedback loops are essential to ensure ongoing compliance and identify further optimization opportunities. Question 9. Market research demonstrates that ENN Energy's operational efficiency in its gas distribution network could be improved. A team is considering a new method for leak detection that promises faster identification, but involves a novel sensor technology not explicitly detailed in current ENN Energy operational guidelines or the primary regulatory framework for gas distribution. The team is eager to implement this to reduce downtime and operational costs. Which of the following approaches best aligns with ENN Energy's commitment to regulatory compliance and responsible operations? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive pilot study of the new leak detection technology, rigorously testing its performance against established safety and environmental benchmarks, and seek formal approval from the relevant regulatory bodies and ENN Energy's compliance department before wider deployment. Option B. Rely on the existing leak detection methods that are fully compliant with current regulations, deferring any consideration of new technologies until the regulatory framework explicitly permits or mandates them. Option C. Implement the new technology on a limited scale in non-critical areas, monitoring its performance and regulatory adherence informally, with the intention of seeking formal approval only if significant issues arise. Option D. Proceed with the implementation of the new leak detection technology immediately, assuming it meets general safety standards, to gain a competitive advantage through improved efficiency. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the implementation of the new leak detection technology immediately, assuming it meets general safety standards, to gain a competitive advantage through improved efficiency. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for ENN Energy employees by requiring them to balance operational efficiency with regulatory compliance and ethical conduct when considering process optimization. The challenge lies in identifying improvements that are not only cost-effective, but also adhere strictly to the regulatory framework governing energy operations in the specified jurisdiction. A deep understanding of these regulations is paramount to avoid potential penalties, reputational damage, and risks to public safety and environmental integrity. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies, and then proposing optimizations that demonstrably align with all applicable ENN Energy internal policies and the relevant regulatory framework. This includes ensuring that any proposed changes do not compromise safety standards, environmental protection measures, or data integrity as mandated by the governing bodies. The justification for this approach is rooted in the principle of responsible corporate citizenship and adherence to the law, which are fundamental ethical obligations for any energy company. Specifically, it upholds the spirit and letter of regulations designed to ensure safe, reliable, and environmentally sound energy provision. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize cost savings or efficiency gains without a comprehensive assessment of regulatory implications. For instance, implementing a process change that bypasses a required safety check, even if it speeds up operations, would be a direct violation of safety regulations. Similarly, adopting a new data management system that does not meet data privacy and security standards would breach data protection laws. Another failure would be to assume that a process is compliant simply because it has been in place for a long time, without actively verifying its current alignment with evolving regulations. These failures stem from a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the legal and ethical responsibilities inherent in the energy sector. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape. Before proposing any optimization, they must identify all relevant laws, guidelines, and internal policies. This should be followed by a risk assessment that evaluates the potential impact of the proposed change on safety, environment, data security, and compliance. Consultation with legal and compliance departments is crucial. Finally, the decision should be based on a holistic evaluation of efficiency, cost-effectiveness, and most importantly, unwavering adherence to the regulatory framework and ethical principles. Question 10. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a proposed process optimization at ENN Energy's facilities could significantly reduce operational costs. However, preliminary analysis suggests this optimization might alter the current emissions profile and potentially impact the integrity of certain safety equipment. Which of the following actions should ENN Energy's management prioritize in response to this situation? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed optimization, including detailed impact assessments on safety, environmental compliance with UK regulations, and operational integrity before any implementation. Option B. Rely on the engineering team's informal assurance that the optimization will not cause significant issues and defer a formal review until after the cost savings have been realized. Option C. Implement the optimization on a trial basis in a limited area to gauge its real-world effects, with minimal formal documentation of the trial's outcomes. Option D. Proceed with the optimization immediately to realize cost savings, assuming existing safety and environmental controls are robust enough to manage any minor deviations. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the optimization immediately to realize cost savings, assuming existing safety and environmental controls are robust enough to manage any minor deviations. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for ENN Energy employees by requiring them to balance operational efficiency with regulatory compliance and ethical conduct when faced with a potential process optimization that could impact safety and environmental standards. The core difficulty lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with changes to established procedures, particularly in a regulated industry like energy. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed optimization does not inadvertently lead to non-compliance or compromise the company's commitment to safety and sustainability. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review and validation process that prioritizes regulatory adherence and safety protocols. This means thoroughly assessing the proposed optimization against all relevant ENN Energy internal policies, UK regulatory frameworks, such as those governed by the Health and Safety Executive, HSE, and the Environment Agency, and industry best practices. This approach is correct because it upholds the fundamental principles of process safety management and environmental stewardship mandated by UK law and ENN Energy's own corporate governance. It ensures that any changes are not only efficient but also safe, legal, and environmentally responsible, thereby protecting the company, its employees, and the public. An incorrect approach would be to implement the optimization based solely on projected cost savings, without a rigorous assessment of its impact on safety and environmental compliance. This failure to conduct due diligence would violate the duty of care owed by ENN Energy and its employees under UK health and safety legislation, which requires employers to take all reasonably practicable steps to prevent risks to health and safety. Furthermore, it could contravene environmental regulations by potentially increasing emissions or waste without proper authorization or mitigation. Another incorrect approach would be to bypass internal review processes, such as seeking informal approval or assuming existing procedures are sufficient. This undermines the established governance structures designed to ensure compliance and risk management, potentially leading to significant legal penalties and reputational damage for ENN Energy. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying the proposed change and its objectives. This should be followed by a thorough risk assessment, consulting relevant regulatory requirements and internal policies. The next step is to evaluate the proposed optimization against these criteria, seeking expert input where necessary. If the optimization meets all safety, environmental, and regulatory standards, it can be approved and implemented with appropriate monitoring. If not, it should be revised or rejected, with clear justification provided. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with ENN Energy's responsibilities. Question 11. Process analysis reveals that ENN Energy's customer onboarding process is experiencing significant delays, leading to customer dissatisfaction. To address this, a proposal has been made to automate a substantial portion of the verification steps using a new software solution. However, concerns have been raised about the potential impact on data accuracy and the ability to handle edge cases that require human judgment, which are critical for ensuring compliance with consumer protection regulations. Which of the following represents the most professionally responsible approach for ENN Energy to take? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the existing onboarding process to identify specific bottlenecks, followed by a phased implementation of automation, where it demonstrably enhances efficiency without compromising data accuracy or the ability to handle complex customer situations, ensuring all changes are vetted against current UK energy regulations and data protection laws. Option B. Focus solely on increasing the staffing levels within the current manual onboarding process to clear the backlog, without exploring any technological solutions or process re-engineering. Option C. Defer any automation plans until a new, fully integrated system can be developed, even if this means continuing with the current inefficient and time-consuming manual processes for an extended period. Option D. Implement the proposed automated software solution immediately to expedite customer onboarding and reduce operational costs, with a plan to address any compliance issues that arise post-implementation. The correct answer is D. Implement the proposed automated software solution immediately to expedite customer onboarding and reduce operational costs, with a plan to address any compliance issues that arise post-implementation. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because ENN Energy, as a regulated entity, must balance operational efficiency with strict adherence to the UK's regulatory framework governing energy supply and consumer protection. The pressure to optimize processes, while a standard business objective, must not lead to shortcuts that compromise safety, data integrity, or fair treatment of customers, all of which are paramount under UK regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any process improvements align with legal obligations and ethical standards. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing and implementing changes that demonstrably improve performance without violating any regulatory requirements. This includes ensuring that any data collected or processed during these improved processes complies with data protection laws, such as the UK GDPR, and that customer interactions remain transparent and fair, as mandated by the energy sector's regulatory bodies. The justification for this approach lies in its proactive alignment with ENN Energy's legal and ethical responsibilities. It prioritizes compliance and customer welfare while pursuing efficiency, thereby mitigating risks of regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of consumer trust. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications would be professionally unacceptable. For instance, automating customer service without ensuring adequate human oversight for complex issues could violate consumer protection regulations that require accessible and effective complaint resolution mechanisms. Similarly, streamlining data handling processes in a way that compromises the accuracy or security of customer information would breach data protection laws and potentially lead to significant penalties. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing new technologies without conducting thorough risk assessments, potentially leading to safety failures in the energy infrastructure, which would be a direct contravention of health and safety regulations and energy supply standards. Professionals at ENN Energy should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory landscape applicable to their operations in the UK. This involves consulting relevant legislation, industry codes of practice, and guidance from regulatory bodies like Ofgem. When considering process optimization, the framework should include a mandatory regulatory impact assessment for any proposed changes. This assessment should identify potential conflicts with existing laws and regulations and ensure that any new processes are designed with compliance as a core feature, not an afterthought. Continuous monitoring and auditing of implemented processes are also crucial to ensure ongoing adherence to regulatory standards. Question 12. Quality control measures reveal that a proposed process optimization initiative at ENN Energy, aimed at reducing operational downtime, has not undergone a formal review against the latest Health and Safety Executive (HSE) guidelines for pipeline integrity management. The initiative suggests altering a maintenance schedule for a critical gas distribution network segment. What is the most appropriate course of action for the ENN Energy Compliance Officer? Option A. Proceed with the process optimization as planned, assuming that the proposed changes are minor and unlikely to impact pipeline integrity, relying on the operational team's judgment. Option B. Delegate the review of the process optimization to a junior member of the compliance team to expedite the approval process. Option C. Inform the operational team that the process optimization can proceed, but advise them to informally monitor for any potential issues related to pipeline integrity after implementation. Option D. Immediately halt the proposed process optimization and initiate a full review of its compliance with all relevant UK HSE regulations and ENN Energy's internal safety protocols before any further consideration. Correct answer is D. Immediately halt the proposed process optimization and initiate a full review of its compliance with all relevant UK HSE regulations and ENN Energy's internal safety protocols before any further consideration. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for ENN Energy employees due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and the rigorous adherence to regulatory compliance, particularly concerning process optimization. The need to balance cost-effectiveness with safety and environmental standards requires careful judgment. Professionals must understand that process optimization, while beneficial, cannot come at the expense of regulatory mandates. The correct approach involves a systematic review and validation of proposed process changes against ENN Energy's established operational procedures and relevant UK regulatory frameworks, such as those overseen by the Health and Safety Executive, HSE, and the Environment Agency. This ensures that any optimization aligns with legal requirements for safety, environmental protection, and operational integrity. Specifically, it requires a thorough risk assessment and impact analysis before implementation, ensuring that no aspect of the optimization compromises the company's license to operate or its commitment to responsible energy provision. This aligns with the ethical duty of care and the legal obligations to operate safely and sustainably. An incorrect approach would be to implement process changes based solely on projected cost savings without a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment. This failure to consider the legal and safety implications could lead to breaches of HSE regulations regarding process safety management or environmental permits, resulting in significant fines, operational shutdowns, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to bypass established internal approval processes for process changes, even if the changes appear minor. This undermines corporate governance and the internal control framework designed to ensure compliance, potentially masking more significant risks. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize speed of implementation over thoroughness, leading to rushed assessments that overlook critical safety or environmental factors. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential consequences of noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and risk management. This involves 1. Identifying the proposed process change and its objectives. 2. Conducting a comprehensive review of all applicable UK regulations and ENN Energy's internal policies. 3. Performing a detailed risk assessment and impact analysis, considering safety, environmental, and operational factors. 4. Seeking appropriate internal and, if necessary, external expert review. 5. Obtaining formal approval based on the assessment findings. 6. Documenting the entire process for audit and future reference. This structured approach ensures that optimization efforts are both effective and compliant. Question 13. The performance metrics show a consistent lag in the processing of customer service requests at ENN Energy's regional hubs. To address this, a team is tasked with optimizing the workflow. Which of the following approaches best balances efficiency gains with regulatory and ethical considerations for ENN Energy? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of current procedures, identify specific points of delay, and propose phased changes that are vetted for compliance with ENN Energy's operational standards and UK energy sector regulations before implementation. Option B. Implement a new, faster software system for logging and routing requests, prioritizing immediate deployment to reduce backlog. Option C. Reduce staffing levels at the regional hubs to incentivize existing staff to work more efficiently under pressure. Option D. Focus on streamlining the initial data entry stage of requests, assuming that subsequent processing will naturally speed up as a result. The correct answer is B. Implement a new, faster software system for logging and routing requests, prioritizing immediate deployment to reduce backlog. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for ENN Energy employees due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and regulatory compliance. The need to optimize processes while adhering to strict industry standards requires careful judgment to avoid unintended consequences that could lead to breaches of regulations or ethical misconduct. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies, and proposing modifications that not only improve performance, but also demonstrably maintain or enhance compliance with ENN Energy's operational guidelines and relevant UK energy sector regulations. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes a balanced outcome, ensuring that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of safety, environmental protection, or data integrity, all of which are critical under UK regulatory frameworks governing energy companies. It aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct and the duty of care expected of ENN energy personnel. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on operational integrity or regulatory adherence is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to shortcuts that violate safety protocols, compromise the accuracy of reporting to regulatory bodies like Ofgem, or introduce risks to the energy supply chain, all of which carry significant legal and reputational consequences. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment and stakeholder consultation is also flawed. Rushing changes without proper due diligence can overlook potential compliance issues or negative impacts on customers, which would be contrary to ENN Energy's commitment to service quality and regulatory obligations. Finally, an approach that involves bypassing established internal approval processes for proposed changes, even if seemingly beneficial, undermines corporate governance and internal controls. This can lead to unapproved modifications that may not align with ENN Energy's broader strategic objectives or regulatory commitments, creating a risk of non-compliance and operational instability. Professionals at ENN Energy should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the performance metrics and the underlying operational issues. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of potential solutions, evaluating each against ENN Energy's internal policies, relevant UK energy regulations, and ethical considerations. Consultation with relevant departments, e.g., compliance, safety, operations, and thorough risk assessment are crucial steps before proposing or implementing any process optimization. The ultimate goal is to achieve sustainable improvements that benefit ENN Energy while upholding its regulatory and ethical responsibilities. Question 14. The control framework reveals that the current candidate screening process at ENN Energy is time-consuming. To improve efficiency, a hiring manager proposes implementing an automated system that prioritizes candidates based on keywords found in their resumes, without a secondary review by a human resource professional to verify the relevance and accuracy of keyword matches. This proposal aims to significantly reduce the time spent on initial candidate evaluation. Option A. Proceed with the automated keyword-based screening system, assuming that keyword matching is a universally accepted and compliant method for candidate evaluation across all jurisdictions relevant to ENN Energy's operations. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the proposed automated system, ensuring it aligns with ENN Energy's commitment to fair hiring practices and all relevant regulatory requirements for candidate assessment before any implementation. Option C. Deploy the automated system immediately and address any potential compliance issues retrospectively if they arise, prioritizing speed of hiring for ENN Energy. Option D. Implement the automated keyword-based screening system as proposed, with a clear understanding that it will expedite the initial review of applications for ENN Energy. The correct answer is D. Implement the automated keyword-based screening system as proposed, with a clear understanding that it will expedite the initial review of applications for ENN Energy. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the stringent regulatory compliance mandated by the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test jurisdiction. The pressure to streamline processes, especially within a hiring context, can inadvertently lead to shortcuts that compromise fairness, data integrity, or adherence to established legal and ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any process optimization does not violate the spirit or letter of the regulations governing hiring practices. The correct approach involves a systematic review and enhancement of existing processes, ensuring that all changes are documented, validated against regulatory requirements, and implemented with appropriate training. This approach prioritizes compliance and fairness by embedding regulatory considerations into the optimization process itself. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good governance and ethical conduct expected within the ENN energy framework, which implicitly demands that all operational improvements must operate within the bounds of applicable laws and guidelines. This proactive stance minimizes the risk of regulatory breaches and upholds the integrity of the hiring process. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering regulatory impact would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to overlooking essential checks and balances required by the ENN energy jurisdiction, potentially resulting in discriminatory practices or the mishandling of candidate data, both of which carry significant legal and reputational risks. Another incorrect approach that involves bypassing established documentation and validation procedures, even with the intention of efficiency, undermines accountability and transparency. This lack of audible trails makes it impossible to demonstrate compliance if challenged and violates principles of sound internal control. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal judgment rather than objective, data-driven analysis and regulatory alignment fails to provide a robust and defensible basis for process changes, increasing the likelihood of unintended negative consequences and regulatory noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory landscape. This should be followed by a risk assessment of proposed changes, evaluating potential impacts on compliance, fairness, and data security. Solutions should then be developed collaboratively, involving stakeholders and legal/compliance experts where necessary, and rigorously tested before implementation. Continuous monitoring and review are essential to ensure ongoing adherence to regulations and to identify further opportunities for improvement that respect the established framework. Question 15. The control framework reveals that ENN Energy's candidate onboarding process has become a bottleneck, impacting time-to-hire metrics. To address this, a proposal suggests streamlining the background check verification by relying on self-reported data from candidates for initial stages, with a full verification only occurring post-offer acceptance. This aims to accelerate the initial screening phase significantly. Option A. Implement the proposed streamlining of background checks, focusing on accelerating the initial screening phase by using self-reported data, with full verification post-offer acceptance. Option B. Delegate the decision-making for onboarding process changes to the HR department without requiring explicit sign-off from the legal and compliance teams. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of the entire candidate onboarding process, identifying specific regulatory touchpoints and potential compliance risks associated with any proposed changes before implementing any modifications. Option D. Immediately implement the proposed streamlining of background checks to improve time to hire, assuming that the risk of inaccurate self-reported data is minimal and manageable. The correct answer is A. Implement the proposed streamlining of background checks, focusing on accelerating the initial screening phase by using self-reported data, with full verification post-offer acceptance. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the stringent regulatory compliance mandated by the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test's jurisdiction. The pressure to optimize processes, such as candidate onboarding, can lead to shortcuts that inadvertently compromise data integrity or fairness, both critical elements under the specified regulatory framework. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any process optimization does not violate the spirit or letter of the law, particularly concerning the fair and transparent assessment of candidates. The correct approach involves a systematic review and enhancement of the existing onboarding process, ensuring that all changes are documented, validated against regulatory requirements, and tested for efficacy and fairness. This approach prioritizes adherence to the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test's regulatory framework by embedding compliance checks at every stage of optimization. It ensures that improvements are sustainable and do not introduce new risks of noncompliance, thereby upholding the integrity of the hiring process and protecting ENN Energy from potential regulatory sanctions or reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering regulatory impact would fail to meet the standards of the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test. This could lead to the introduction of biases or the overlooking of essential verification steps, directly contravening the principles of fair assessment and data protection, as likely stipulated by the exam's jurisdiction. Another incorrect approach that bypasses established validation protocols for new process elements risks implementing changes that are not robust or compliant, potentially leading to errors in candidate evaluation or data handling. This disregard for procedural integrity is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory landscape. When considering process optimization, the initial step should be to identify potential impacts on compliance. This involves consulting regulatory guidelines, seeking legal or compliance department input, and conducting risk assessments. Any proposed changes must then be evaluated against these requirements. The process should include pilot testing and validation before full implementation, with clear documentation of the rationale, methodology, and outcomes. Continuous monitoring and auditing are essential to ensure ongoing compliance and to identify any emergent issues. Question 16. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual fluctuation in emissions data for a critical pipeline at ENN Energy's facility. This anomaly has been observed for the past hour, and while it does not immediately suggest a catastrophic failure, it deviates significantly from established operational norms. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the ENN Energy Operations team to address this situation? Option A. Immediately consult with senior management and legal counsel to determine the appropriate response strategy. Option B. Conduct a thorough, data-driven investigation by cross-referencing the anomalous readings with other sensor data, historical logs, and relevant ENN energy operational procedures and UK environmental guidelines before implementing any corrective actions. Option C. Continue monitoring the situation for another 2 hours to see if the anomaly self-corrects, assuming it is a transient sensor issue. Option D. Initiate a full process shutdown to prevent any potential environmental release while a detailed investigation is conducted. Correct answer is D. Initiate a full process shutdown to prevent any potential environmental release while a detailed investigation is conducted. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because ENN Energy, as a regulated entity, must balance operational efficiency with strict adherence to environmental and safety regulations. The monitoring system's anomaly requires immediate and informed action, where a delay or misinterpretation could lead to significant regulatory penalties, environmental damage, and reputational harm. The core challenge lies in accurately diagnosing the cause of the anomaly and implementing the most appropriate and compliant corrective action. The correct approach involves a systematic investigation that prioritizes data integrity and regulatory compliance. This means thoroughly analyzing the anomalous readings, cross-referencing with other available data sources, e.g., historical performance, maintenance logs, other sensor readings, and consulting relevant ENN energy internal procedures and applicable UK environmental regulations. The justification for this approach is rooted in the precautionary principle and the legal obligations placed upon energy companies to prevent pollution and ensure safe operations. Specifically, under UK environmental law, companies have a duty of care to prevent environmental harm, and failure to investigate and address potential issues indicated by monitoring systems can be construed as a breach of this duty. Furthermore, regulatory bodies like the Environment Agency expect proactive identification and mitigation of environmental risks. An incorrect approach that involves immediately shutting down the entire process without a thorough diagnosis is professionally unacceptable. This is because it could lead to unnecessary disruption, significant financial losses, and potential supply chain impacts, all without a clear understanding of the actual risk. It bypasses the due diligence required by regulations that often mandate a risk-based approach to operational changes. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on anecdotal evidence from operators without verifying with system data or consulting official procedures, fails to meet the standards of evidence-based decision-making expected under regulatory frameworks. This can lead to misdiagnosis and inappropriate corrective actions, potentially exacerbating the problem or causing new ones. Finally, an approach that involves delaying action to await further, non-critical data, while the anomaly persists, constitutes a failure to act promptly in the face of potential environmental or safety risks, which is a direct contravention of the proactive stance required by UK environmental legislation and ENN Energy's own operational safety protocols. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with acknowledging the anomaly, followed by a structured data-driven investigation. This involves consulting established protocols, seeking expert input where necessary, and making decisions that are both operationally sound and demonstrably compliant with all relevant UK regulations and ENN Energy's internal policies. The process should be documented meticulously to provide an audit trail for regulatory scrutiny. Question 17. The control framework reveals that the current process for reporting energy consumption data at ENN Energy is inefficient, leading to delays in financial reconciliation. A project team is tasked with optimizing this process. Which of the following actions best aligns with the ENN Energy's commitment to robust internal controls and regulatory compliance under UK frameworks? Option A. Focus solely on reducing the number of data entry fields without assessing the impact on data accuracy or the ability to meet regulatory reporting requirements. Option B. Outsource the entire data processing function to a third-party vendor without establishing clear service-level agreements or ensuring the vendor's compliance with ENN Energy's internal control standards and UK data protection laws. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the existing data flow, identify specific control points, document proposed process changes, and seek approval from relevant stakeholders and compliance officers before implementing any modifications. Option D. Immediately implement a new, unproven software solution that promises faster data entry, bypassing the standard change control and validation procedures to achieve rapid efficiency gains. The correct answer is D. Immediately implement a new, unproven software solution that promises faster data entry, bypassing the standard change control and validation procedures to achieve rapid efficiency gains. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with adherence to the ENN Energy's internal control framework and relevant UK regulations governing energy sector operations and financial reporting. The pressure to demonstrate immediate process improvements can lead to shortcuts that compromise data integrity or regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization efforts are sustainable, compliant, and do not introduce new risks. The correct approach involves a systematic review and documentation of existing processes, identification of bottlenecks, and the development of proposed changes that are then validated against the ENN Energy's control framework and UK regulatory requirements before implementation. This ensures that any optimization is robust, compliant, and aligned with the company's risk appetite and governance standards. This approach is justified by the need to maintain accurate financial reporting, prevent fraud, and comply with regulations such as the UK Corporate Governance Code and relevant accounting standards, which mandate robust internal controls. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost reduction without thorough analysis risks violating the ENN Energy's internal control framework by bypassing necessary validation steps. This could lead to the implementation of flawed processes that generate inaccurate data, potentially resulting in misstated financial reports and noncompliance with UK accounting standards. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed of implementation without considering the impact on data integrity or regulatory compliance could lead to breaches of data protection regulations or reporting requirements, exposing ENN Energy to fines and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach that involves making changes without consulting relevant stakeholders or documenting the process undermines the principles of good governance and accountability, making it difficult to audit or troubleshoot issues later, and potentially contravening the spirit of the UK Corporate Governance Code. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes a phased approach, understand the current state, identify potential improvements, assess risks and compliance implications, pilot changes, and then implement and monitor. This structured methodology ensures that process optimization efforts are not only efficient but also compliant, ethical, and sustainable, aligning with the overarching principles of good corporate governance and regulatory adherence. Question 18. Upon reviewing the operational efficiency of ENN Energy's gas distribution network, a team proposes a significant alteration to the standard maintenance scheduling protocol. This alteration aims to reduce downtime and associated costs by consolidating several routine inspection tasks into a single, less frequent visit. However, this consolidation deviates from the established frequency outlined in ENN Energy's internal operational manuals, which are designed to align with UK regulatory requirements for gas infrastructure safety and maintenance. The team leader is eager to implement this change quickly to meet quarterly performance targets. What is the most appropriate course of action for the team leader? Option A. Consult with external industry peers for their opinions on similar process optimizations before making a decision. Option B. Halt the implementation and initiate a formal review process to assess the proposed alterations' compliance with UK regulatory requirements and ENN Energy's safety and operational standards, including a thorough risk assessment and impact analysis. Option C. Proceed with the proposed alteration immediately to demonstrate proactive cost-saving measures and meet performance targets, assuming the core safety checks are still performed. Option D. Implement the alteration on a trial basis in a limited section of the network to gauge its effectiveness before seeking formal approval. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the proposed alteration immediately to demonstrate proactive cost-saving measures and meet performance targets, assuming the core safety checks are still performed. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the stringent regulatory compliance expected of a company like ENN Energy, particularly concerning process optimization. The pressure to demonstrate cost savings and improve performance can sometimes lead to shortcuts or overlooking critical procedural steps, which could have significant safety, environmental, or financial repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization efforts are undertaken within the established legal and ethical boundaries. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies, and proposing changes that are thoroughly vetted for compliance with ENN Energy's internal policies and relevant UK regulations, such as those governed by the Health and Safety Executive (HSE) and the Environment Agency. This includes conducting impact assessments, obtaining necessary approvals, and ensuring that all changes are implemented with proper training and oversight. This methodical process ensures that optimization does not compromise safety standards, environmental protection, or regulatory adherence, thereby upholding ENN Energy's commitment to responsible operations and mitigating legal and reputational risks. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without a comprehensive risk assessment would fail to meet regulatory obligations. For instance, bypassing established safety protocols during process modification, even if it appears to save time or money, directly violates HSE regulations and ENN Energy's duty of care. Similarly, implementing changes that could inadvertently increase emissions or waste discharge without proper environmental impact studies and permits would contravene Environment Agency guidelines and environmental protection laws. Another incorrect approach might involve implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or without proper validation, which could lead to unforeseen operational failures, safety hazards, and noncompliance with industry best practices and ENN Energy's own quality management systems. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape, ENN Energy's internal policies, and the potential impacts of any proposed changes. This involves a risk-based approach, where potential benefits are weighed against potential risks, with a strong emphasis on ensuring compliance and safety at every stage. Seeking expert advice, engaging relevant stakeholders, and maintaining detailed documentation are crucial components of this framework. Question 19. The control framework reveals potential inefficiencies in ENN Energy's gas supply chain management. To optimize these processes, which of the following actions would best uphold regulatory compliance and operational integrity? Option A. Rely on informal feedback from operational staff to guide process adjustments, prioritizing speed of implementation over a structured control assessment. Option B. Focus solely on reducing operational costs by eliminating certain verification steps in the supply chain, assuming that the current regulatory environment is flexible. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of existing control procedures, identify potential compliance gaps or redundancies, and propose targeted enhancements to strengthen oversight and efficiency in line with regulatory expectations. Option D. Implement immediate changes to streamline operations based on the perceived inefficiencies, without a formal assessment of the impact on existing control mechanisms. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of existing control procedures, identify potential compliance gaps or redundancies, and propose targeted enhancements to strengthen oversight and efficiency in line with regulatory expectations. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the stringent regulatory compliance expected of ENN Energy, a company operating within a regulated energy sector. The pressure to optimize processes can sometimes lead to shortcuts that inadvertently compromise adherence to established protocols, potentially impacting safety, environmental standards, or financial reporting accuracy. Careful judgment is required to ensure that process improvements do not create new risks or violate the specific regulatory framework governing ENN Energy's operations. Correct approach involves a systematic review and enhancement of existing control mechanisms to ensure they remain effective and aligned with current regulatory expectations. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to both operational excellence and compliance. Specifically, it involves identifying potential gaps or inefficiencies within the current control framework and proposing modifications that strengthen oversight without introducing new vulnerabilities. This aligns with the overarching regulatory duty of care and the principle of maintaining robust internal controls, as mandated by the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test's specified jurisdiction, assumed to be UK/SISI for this example, focusing on principles of good governance and regulatory adherence. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness would fail to adequately assess the impact of process changes on the control environment. This could lead to the implementation of new processes that, while seemingly efficient, bypass critical checks and balances, thereby increasing the risk of non-compliance or operational errors. Such an approach neglects the fundamental regulatory requirement for due diligence and risk management. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the control implications would be equally problematic. Cost-cutting measures that undermine the effectiveness of internal controls, such as reducing the frequency of reconciliations or eliminating necessary approval steps, directly contravene the principles of sound financial management and regulatory oversight. This could expose ENN Energy to financial misstatements or operational failures, leading to regulatory sanctions. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few individuals without a structured review process would be professionally unsound. Regulatory compliance and effective process optimization require data-driven analysis and a comprehensive understanding of the control framework. Relying on informal assessments increases the likelihood of overlooking critical control weaknesses or implementing changes that are not aligned with best practices or regulatory mandates. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant regulatory requirements and the company's risk appetite. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of the current process and its associated controls, identifying areas for improvement. Any proposed changes must then be evaluated for their impact on compliance, risk, and operational effectiveness, with a formal review and approval process before implementation. Continuous monitoring and periodic reassessment of controls are also crucial to ensure ongoing effectiveness. Question 20. The control framework reveals that ENN Energy's current candidate onboarding process for its hiring assessment test is experiencing significant delays, impacting the timely commencement of evaluations. Considering the need for process optimization, which of the following actions best aligns with regulatory expectations and professional integrity for ENN Energy? Option A. Rely on informal feedback from recent hires to identify and implement changes to the onboarding process, bypassing formal documentation and regulatory review. Option B. Immediately implement a new, unvetted third-party onboarding software that promises faster processing times without prior consultation with the legal or compliance departments. Option C. Reduce the number of mandatory data verification checks for candidates to expedite the onboarding timeline, assuming that most candidates are honest. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the existing onboarding workflow to identify specific bottlenecks and propose compliant modifications to streamline data submission and verification steps, ensuring all changes are validated against the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test jurisdiction's regulatory requirements. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the existing onboarding workflow to identify specific bottlenecks and propose compliant modifications to streamline data submission and verification steps, ensuring all changes are validated against the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test's jurisdiction's regulatory requirements. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational efficiency with the stringent regulatory compliance mandated by the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test jurisdiction. The pressure to streamline processes for a large-scale hiring initiative, such as that undertaken by ENN Energy, can tempt individuals to bypass established control mechanisms. However, any deviation from approved procedures, especially those designed to ensure fairness and data integrity, carries significant regulatory and ethical risks. Careful judgment is paramount to ensure that process optimization does not inadvertently lead to non-compliance or compromise the integrity of the hiring process. The correct approach involves a systematic review and enhancement of existing controls within the established regulatory framework. This means identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies in the current hiring process and proposing modifications that are fully compliant with the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test's jurisdiction's regulations. This approach prioritizes maintaining the integrity and fairness of the assessment process while seeking improvements. Specifically, it aligns with the regulatory expectation that all hiring processes, including assessments, are conducted in a manner that is transparent, equitable, and adheres to all stipulated guidelines. This proactive and compliant method ensures that ENN Energy can achieve its hiring goals without compromising its legal and ethical obligations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering regulatory impact would be professionally unacceptable. For instance, implementing a new assessment platform without undergoing the required validation and approval processes stipulated by the ENN Energy Hiring Assessment Test's jurisdiction's regulations would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. It bypasses essential checks designed to ensure the assessment's validity, reliability, and fairness, potentially leading to discriminatory outcomes or legal challenges. Another incorrect approach would be to reduce the scope of background checks or verification steps to save time. This directly contravenes regulations that often mandate thorough vetting to ensure suitability and compliance, risking the hiring of unqualified or unsuitable candidates and exposing ENN Energy to reputational and legal damage. A third incorrect approach might involve relying on anecdotal evidence or informal feedback to modify assessment criteria, rather than adhering to data-driven, regulated procedures. This undermines the objective and standardized nature of the hiring process, violating principles of fairness and potentially leading to biased decision-making, which is a direct contravention of regulatory expectations for objective assessment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape for ENN Energy. This involves identifying all relevant laws, guidelines, and internal policies governing hiring and assessment processes. Next, they should analyze the current process to pinpoint areas for improvement, always framing potential changes within the context of regulatory compliance. Any proposed optimization must be evaluated against these regulations for potential risks or conflicts. Seeking expert advice, such as from legal counsel or compliance officers, is crucial before implementing significant changes. The decision-making process should prioritize the integrity of the hiring process and the protection of ENN Energy from regulatory and ethical breaches over mere expediency.